House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy claiming none of this would be happening if the White House had acted sooner. Watch.
Ukraine was craving the ability to defend themselves. Had we moved the weapons to Ukraine earlier, that they could defend themselves, it would have saved thousands of lives and probably the decision of Putin not to enter.
Really? In fairness, the Biden administration has given Ukraine several $billion in aid and military supplies since the war began. Was it too little too late, or should we be staying the hell out of this completely? Here to discuss, Libertarian Institute director, he's also the editorial director at antiwar.com. Scott Horton is back. Yeah, Scott Horton. So in your estimation, Joe Biden should know better than anyone else about Ukraine and about puppet governments and about U.S. manipulation since he's 25 years into the process. You've talked about that as Senator, Vice President, and now President. Is Kevin McCarthy right? Should we have given a bunch more weapons to Ukraine sooner? And would that have been a deterrent to Russia?
No. And it's such a ridiculous argument. If they'd given more weapons to Ukraine sooner, we would have just had a war sooner. That's what the war is about, is this provocation of them making Ukraine essentially a de facto member of NATO, standardizing their military and arming them up. And, of course, after Obama overthrew the government, and Biden was in on it, Vice President Biden and Jake Sullivan and Victoria Nuland overthrew the government in Kiev in 2014, Obama was afraid to arm the Ukrainians, one, because of the presence of Nazis inside, like the Azov battalion, inside Ukraine's armed forces, but two, because it would be such a further provocation against Russia when the coup had already led to the loss of Crimea and the horrible war in the east of the country. And so Obama refused to send them any real weapons, just trucks and other supplies like that. But then it was when Trump came in order to defend from the Russia hoax that you were just describing with your guests there, and in order to prove what an agent of Russia he wasn't, and he expanded arms to Ukraine and expanded our naval presence in the Black and Baltic and Arctic seas, and also bomber flights right up to 12 miles off of their borders, testing their defenses and all these kinds of provocations. He also added 2 more countries to NATO and tore up 2 extremely important treaties, the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty and the Open Skies Treaty. So all of that then led to, then when Biden came in, all he did was escalate even further and had the massive sea breeze exercises last summer in the Black Sea with, I think, 37 nations joining in, essentially practicing an attack on Russia. And then also, you know, beginning last fall, started arming up, not just since the start of the war, but since last fall, started sending in hundreds of millions and eventually billions of dollars of arms into Ukraine. They told the New York Times in December this was carefully calibrated to deter Putin from invading, but not provoke him. So either they're terrible at calibrating, or they decided to turn the heat up in order to provoke this fight, which they now...
Or they don't know the meaning of the word deterrent, because they've used that in several different contexts, and every time so far, they have been wrong. You also said that the president is engaging in anti-diplomacy. I want you to explain that, because it's pretty clear from his rhetoric that he's not trying to come to a peaceful resolution here, himself personally.
Right. Yep. In fact, the same day that I was last on your show, the Washington Post that night put out a story that Biden and his people in NATO, they don't want to see the war end too early. They said, I swear this is in the Washington Post, they would rather see Ukrainians continue fighting and dying rather than see the war end on a negotiated settlement. They would rather bleed Russia. And in the run-up to the war, there's now a new podcast with Derek Chollet, who works for Joe Biden, who explained in a podcast for War on the Rocks that they absolutely refused to negotiate a deal with Russia where they would promise not to extend NATO membership to Ukraine. Now, Biden's policy was not to bring them into NATO. Everybody knew the Germans wouldn't allow it anyway, but they refused to put it in writing, seemingly attempting to provoke this war.
Zelensky says that every time he opens his mouth. He's like, send me helicopters and a bunch of Stinger missiles, and we won't join NATO. Okay, bye.
Yep. And I'll tell you what, too, Biden even admitted that, yeah, they're probably going to have to give up, admit that they've lost Crimea, and they're going to have to give up the Donbass, too. Even Biden admitted that. So what are we fighting for, Kennedy?
I don't know why we're fighting for anything, because it's over there. There it is. Scott Horton, thank you for your clarity and kindness. I appreciate it.